Today I want to take some time and answer the burning question that's been on everyone's mind for the past couple days since the election of the new pope. Is the new pope an anti-Trump woke progressive? On May 8th, 2025, the Vatican announced that they had elected a new pope, Pope Leo XIV, formerly Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost of Chicago. Hey, he's American. First American pope. That's really historic. So naturally, in our overly tribalistic world where content and likes are the highest form of social credit and validation, the question was posed, is the Pope red team or blue team? And the answer is more nuanced than yes or no. It's not an unexpected question in a world where politics has really dominated everything, and it has seeped into every really nook and cranny of our life. Is the grocery store I shop at red team or blue team? Is the director of this movie red team or blue team? Is the person cooking my steak at a fancy restaurant red team or blue team? Is my neighbor's dog red team or blue team? Any suspicion of being on the other team brings pointed accusations of you either being a woke progressive communist or a MAGA fascist. There's really little in between when it comes to our overly tribalistic and political world. But the question of the Pope being red team or blue team is not as easily answered as most influencers out there want it to be. Harry Sisson, a Democratic influencer and mouthpiece for the Democratic Party, was quick to jump on X within a few hours of the election and the announcement of the new Pope, saying that he is, quote, MAGA's worst nightmare, which would implicitly mean that somehow the new Pope is on his team, which is the blue team. However, the points that he makes are overgeneralized and really taken out of context to prove Harry's point, which is simply that he's trying to score one for the blue team. But not to be outdone for clicks and attention, conservative influencers were also quick to go to social media and to point out that the new pope was somehow this anti-MAGA woke progressive, mostly because he reposted and quoted a J.D. Vance post, which, by the way, J.D. Vance is a devout practicing Catholic, where he simply kind of stated to J.D. Vance that Jesus asked us not to rank the love for others when J.D. Vance had talked about ranking love of who they should care about first. Basically, his point was that he called us to love everyone as we would love Jesus, which I know sounds like a radical idea, but that's basically what he was saying. Looking at these posts, once you get past the fact that MAGA Voice incorrectly called him Pope Prevost, the other posts are just as tribalistic and odd. Quote, I just got on my knees and prayed to Jesus Christ to give Pope Prevost the strength to overcome TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. And if you're not familiar with that, what it basically means is that everything that Trump does, you hate because you just can't stand Trump. Another quote goes on to say, another gay anti-white globalist pope. Another one says, the new pope seems to be anti-Trump and pro-open borders. Finally, y'all, I think the new pope is woke. And where does all this early vitriol come from? First, I think it's the need in our society to constantly figure out what team everybody is on. And this applies to the Pope as well. This means that they take everything and blow it out of proportion and take it out of context to figure out whether or not it shows they are on the red team or the blue team. Most of the outrage on the right stems from the Cardinal correcting J.D. Vance, basically saying that Jesus really taught us to love everyone as you love him. And I don't think this implicitly means that he hates J.D. Vance. I like to say that if I were to walk into my parish, and yes, I'm a practicing Catholic, as you can see by the rosary around my wrist right here, that if I were to go into my local parish and say different things about teachings and do different things that are not in line with the Catholic Church, and one of the fathers came by and pulled me aside and said, that's not how we do things, and were to correct me, I don't think it means that father necessarily hates me and is against me. I think his role is to guide me in the faith as being a Catholic. So I think that's his role. It doesn't mean that he hates me. But nevertheless, it was lighter fluid for the red team to go into a tizzy to figure out what team he was on. Which brings us back to the question, is the new pope an anti-Trump woke progressive? My answer, no. Because that's not really how we define popes or we look at popes. Popes historically do exercise a ton of influence throughout the world. I mean, they are the head of a church with 1.5 billion people. There is a little bit of influence there. Trying to put the Pope into a political box is like trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. One example I can compare it to is Supreme Court justices. While more political than popes, trying to place them on red team or blue team misses the mark on how you look at and determine what they stand for. Yes, justices are nominated by presidents and they're affirmed by senators, who, of course, are all political. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that they are somehow Republican or Democrat, especially not in their roles as justices. If you notice during any State of the Union speech, Supreme Court justices actually sit on the sidelines and they don't get up and stand and they don't even clap for certain things because they're supposed to be the impartial judicial branch of our government, a basic check and balance on the rest of government. The labels of justices being conservative or liberal is not really indicative of their political stances, but their judicial philosophy. For example, conservative justices often believe in the idea of originalism, which means that you have to stick to the original intent of what the founders wanted when they wrote it down in the Constitution. And it's not your job to legislate from the bench and try and figure out what they might have meant or what it means in today's society. Basically legislating and creating law from the bench. Liberal justices believe that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, which means that as times change, it changes along with it, and that laws are supposed to be upheld as long as it goes towards the spirit of the law. And they don't really care about original intent or what the founders really wanted. When decisions come out of the Supreme Court, most people rush to look at the vote count as if we're looking at the box score of a baseball game. How many votes did our team, quote unquote, score? Did the decision benefit my team? Often, though, I think it's way more nuanced than that. And as someone who's actually read a ton of Supreme Court decisions, I can tell you that they're usually well-researched and very well articulated. And their rationale, while you may not agree with it, does make sense. So again, it's hard to say whether it's a vote for the Republicans or the Democrats or red team versus blue team. And I think the same can be said for popes. Taking one or two things or something that the pope said out of context and trying to fit them into whatever political box you want them to be is really missing the point of what the pope is supposed to be doing. I've heard several times that this pope and his election is a direct rebuke of Trump somehow, which honestly kind of makes me laugh a little bit. See, President Trump has 3 or so years left in his presidency. Disregard the fact that he has teased the idea of running for 2028. He basically has less than 4 years, around 3 years left in his presidency. This pope will likely be around for, if not 15 years, if not more. So I don't think that the Cardinals were sitting in that conclave and made their whole decision based on the fact that they wanted to own MAGA somehow or be a direct middle finger to President Trump, which sounds anti-Catholic and anti-Christian anyway. See, the Catholic Church has been around for over 2,000 years. It was founded by St. Peter. In fact, the Vatican is built on the hill where St. Peter was crucified upside down, mind you, by Emperor Nero in the Roman Empire. So even though the Roman Empire has come and gone, the Vatican still stands 2,000 years later. Which is to my point that the Catholic Church has seen empires rise and fall, it has seen kings and queens come and go, and it has lasted through every single presidency, the American Republic. Yet it still continues to stand. And I think the thought that his appointment was basically just to be a rebuke or a pushback against President Trump for 3 years is honestly kind of silly. Now, it's way too early to figure out what plans this pope has for the church. Papal candidates don't make campaign speeches. They're not trying to campaign to be pope. We don't know going into it what their campaign promises or promises to be are, so we don't really have an idea of what they're going to do. In fact, much of it is a mystery that we have to glean from basically what name did they take. For example, they took Pope Leo XIV, which is following from Pope Leo XIII, who was big into applying the teachings of the Catholic Church to modern times. He was the Pope right around the time of the turn of the century into the 20th century. So there are some things we can look at, maybe get a couple clues. But let's dive into this whole progressive and conservative thing. Is he truly progressive? Well, I would say yes and no. See, Pope Leo XIV believed in Pope Francis's ideas of opening the church to allow more people to be welcomed into the church. Pope Francis was a big believer that everybody is welcome at the table as long as they come forward and they repent for their sins and ask for forgiveness. They can all, as long as they continue to sin no more, they can be a part of the Catholic Church. There's nothing preventing them from being part of the Catholic Church. He is progressive in that sense that he wants to grow the church and continue to make inroads with different people across the globe. Now, I would say that this strategy is actually working. When you see an article like the New York Post recently, which showed that young people are flocking back to the Catholic Church in droves, and also that you see for the first time Catholics are on the uprise in England so much that they are about to overtake Anglicans for the first time since King Henry VIII. It's pretty incredible to see the growth in the Catholic Church. So Pope Francis's strategy of being progressive and welcoming people seems to be working pretty well for the Catholic Church. So naturally, I think Pope Leo wants to continue that tradition. But I think they also want to say that Pope Leo is somehow progressive because he's made comments about treating migrants humanely and with respect, which I don't think is that radical of an idea when we think about how Jesus wanted us to love everybody as you love him. So there's nothing wrong with the idea of thinking these are still human beings, legal status or not, we should treat them humanely and with respect. Now, the laws of the land is not something that the Catholic Church wants to step into, but they do want to tell people it's important to treat them humanely and with respect. Another thing that people like to point to him being progressive and that he is woke anti-Trump progressive is his stance on climate change. Now, he has said that same thing that Pope Francis has, is that the Catholic Church should take a little bit more stance on climate change and that we should be encouraging people in the church to care about climate change and to focus on the wellness of the planet. I don't think that necessarily means that Pope Francis or now Pope Leo mean that we all have to go out and elect Democrats and hand over all of our tax dollars to some big, huge statist bureaucratic system that is going to somehow solve the weather. I think it basically is saying, look, let's take care of the planet because we love the people who are coming after us and we want to make sure they can enjoy it as well. I don't think that's a horrible thing as well. But again, when you take these issues and you take these statements and you examine them through a political lens of red team versus blue team, naturally you're going to find that these statements mean they end up on one side or the other. But again, I think that misses the point of really what this pope or any popes are really about. Likewise, I think for the blue team, Pope Leo has taken a number of stances that would say through their lens that he is probably a red hat MAGA supporting conservative. For example, he has said that traditional family values need to be the bedrock of our society, basically traditional family values, saying that those are the bedrocks of Christian faith. Likewise, for the blue team, Pope Leo has taken a number of stances that, if examined in a political light, would make him a member of the red team. For example, as cardinal, Pope Leo consistently upheld teachings on marriage, sexuality, and the sanctity of life. Translated into political speak, he was anti-woke on a lot of issues that Democrats hold dear when it comes to social issues. As prefect for the dicastery of the bishops, this is basically the group that nominates the bishops who are going to be running the Catholic Church on a more local level, he was dedicated to finding candidates who were more aligned with the orthodoxy of the Catholic Church. Basically, again, the traditional teachings and values of the Catholic Church. He's also against the idea of ordaining women as deacons, which is something that Pope Francis also shared because they believe that ordaining women as deacons doesn't really change or help the problems that the Catholic Church faces. He's also gone to say that the dangers of gender ideology and other progressive issues are undermining the Christian faith. Now, if you're a political influencer or a pundit, you're probably keeping score right now and trying to still figure out what side he lands on. But as I keep saying, I think this really misses the point. Pope Leo is not stating these positions to appease American politics. His purpose is to further the goals of the Catholic Church. Pope Leo, during his time, is going to say and publish many opinions on everything that he can. And it's important to remember that these are not done to influence American politics. To Pope Leo, there's a higher purpose for what he's doing. So bottom line, trying to place Pope Leo on red team or blue team is basically a futile endeavor because at the end of the day, not everything is political. Trying to force everything through the lens of politics really prohibits us from examining issues and events with clear eyes and an open mind. Because when you try and put everything into a political box, it doesn't necessarily work and it doesn't necessarily translate. And it also forces people to take things out of context for improper purposes. So at the end of the day, whether the new pope is an anti-Trump woke progressive, I think the answer is no. And I think the answer is no because it's sort of a silly question. It doesn't really apply. It's kind of like asking, is my neighbor's dog red team or blue team? Is the person who is cooking my steak at a fancy restaurant red team or blue team? They have a different purpose, right? They are not there to jam politics down your throat. They're there to do a job. And in Pope Leo's job, it's to continue the traditions and teaching of the Catholic Church and to continue to grow the church for many years to come. That's his sole job. And how he does that, or how he opines about doing that, is really up to him as Pope and those who are part of the Catholic Church to follow and listen and determine. And those are my thoughts. I just wanted to share them. Hope you enjoyed it.